Hey, you guys. Hey, Periscope. You can't see the guests that I'm interviewing, but they're amazing. Trust me, they're amazing. They have a lot of good information. And so we are live on Facebook. We're also live on YouTube, and we're live on my Periscope as well. So you can find us in either of these locations. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring the people that I have in who are more savvy in this area than myself with regard to the legalization from a legal aspect, as well as from the aspect of incorporating it into your business. And so you can make some money moves with the legalization of marijuana, and we're all aware of that. And I think that it was important for me to bring this topic because there's a number of layers to this conversation, but it's imperative that people know that even if you do not desire or are for some reason unable to acquire a dispensary, there are other options available that you can literally infuse into your business, no pun intended, so that you can also be able to benefit and monetize off of the legalization. Welcome to the broadcast. Thank you for tuning in. Those of you all who are watching on Periscope, thank you for tuning in, as well as I make my return back to Periscope where the live streaming all started for me, as well as the people who are tuning in via Facebook and YouTube. Thank you so much. For those of you all who follow me on Facebook, if you could be so kind as to go ahead and follow me on YouTube as well, subscribe to my channel there because I'll have some pertinent and separate content that won't be put out on YouTube for you to follow. I'm sorry, that won't be put out on Facebook for you to follow me on YouTube. So I'll drop the link for you so that you can find me easily in the comments of this broadcast. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to put your questions in the comment box and I will field them into the interview. Now, be open-minded to the fact that regardless of what industry you're in, the legalization can impact your bottom line. And so we're going to get some information that you can use on today. I have another industry expert that will be joining us a little bit later. Actually, he just came in the broadcast. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him in so that we can bounce questions back and forth between the two experts. As you start to come in, please feel free to share out the broadcast if you feel so inclined to do so, as well as post any questions that you may have, and I will field them in once again. So thank you so much for tuning in. Let's go ahead and bring in our other expert, who is Timothy Johnson. So, okay, he's in the broadcast and you'll be able to see him shortly. So let's go ahead and get started. So first up, I have with me attorney Brendan Schiller. He has done a lot of work in regard to the legalization of marijuana, and he's very savvy with regard to the processes and with regard to some of the limitations as well. And so he's going to break it down from a legal standpoint for us. And then we're also going to have someone who's infused marijuana and the legalization into his business. And we're going to talk a little bit about his money move into that industry as well. So welcome to the broadcast, both of you gentlemen. I know you guys are super busy and we're going to keep it to a shortened broadcast. And so I just want to give you all the opportunity to introduce yourself beyond what I have introduced to the audience. If there's anything you want to add on, please feel free to do so right now. I think Timothy is having some audio issues. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see the unmute button. You can click on that so that we can hear you, because I do see that you're muted right now. So go ahead, counselor. You got the floor.
You want me to speak?
Yes. I want you. I want you to further elaborate on your role with regard to the industry and what experience you have with regard to the legalization of marijuana.
Sure. I'm the managing partner of the law firm, Monetizing Civil Rights Court law firm, the managing partner of a consulting firm, and I'm the board founder of the Westside Justice Center. The consulting firm, 5.5 years ago, started working in the marijuana industry. We represented a client, actually 6 years ago now, who obtained a medical marijuana dispensary in Illinois, and was currently up and running. About 3 years ago, we started working with small Black and brown investors, trying to find creative ways to get them into the industry, which we did. And then in the fall, I represented 23 different clients doing 201 dispensary applications. All three of the applications were what's called social equity applications, and essentially a sliding scale. And more happened with that basis.
Okay.
So I currently doing applications for craft and futures and transport.
Thank you so much for that brief introduction. I already have my first question in mind after hearing that. So I'm going to actually change what my first question was going to be because of that. So go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, Timothy Johnson.
Okay. First of all, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. My name is Timothy Johnson. I've been a chef for about 15 years. Worked in all type of restaurants. James Beard Award nominee 4 times. Food Network. Worked in high-end restaurants, Chicago, Texas. Worked with people from New York, LA. I mean, everybody. So when this whole legalization um, when this whole legalization movement started happening with Colorado and California, I just got myself invested into it, and then went from investing into it to educating about cannabis more than just smoking it and consuming it, and then from self-education to actually getting certified to be a grower, a bud tender, horticulturalist. I mean, everything I could possibly learn about cannabis, I've been doing so far, working with growers, working with people left and right to make sure that one, I'm not out here just saying, "Oh, weed is weed," or just I'm picking with weed. Like I want to, I bring forth the experience of where we are cracking the science behind cannabis. Therefore, people have a great experience and don't have the horror experiences of getting too high, or don't have the experiences of I liked it, but I tasted the cannabis in it too much, so forth and so on. So I've been working with people as far as county wide, working with lawyers as well, judges, working with even the governor, J.B. Prister, as well as Kim Fox, state attorney, to just get things in order. And so right now, what I'm working on, my company's called Bud Voyage, which you guys saw on the opening post. Bud Voyage is just a whole experience from merchandise to everything you possibly think about as far as cannabis wise. Working with people, working with people who were once in the financial district who decided to go over to cannabis. So we have been working on that, and actually I'm working on a 160-acre weed resort right now in Illinois, property wise. So we are building up at that. It's going to be a big feat that we're trying to do all that, and I would love to have Brendan's number. This is all over with because he is talking my language with helping people out with this type of thing. So I'm glad that he's on here as well, so we can all come together and make it a great movement.
Absolutely. So, Attorney Brendan Schiller works very closely with the Justice Junkie Movement curator, Attorney April Pryor, who's been interviewed a couple of times on a few different platforms by me. So they do incredible work with regard to the justice movement in its totality. But Brendan's specialty, one of his specialties, is the legalization. And so I'm going to go ahead and field my first question to wise counsel here, because for us to really monetize, we have to operate within the restrictions and boundaries of the law, of course. What's interesting for me is that while in law school in Portland, Oregon, because that's where I received the scholarship to, recreational marijuana became legal where medicinal was already legal. And so I got to witness some of these changes while in law school and seeing how they impact a lot of different areas. And so I want to first touch on the social equity piece. And so we've heard that term, kind of used a lot in a broader context. So can you kind of explain to somebody who may be newer to this conversation, specifically the piece on social equity and the process that people went through to kind of get their stake in this industry?
So social equity is what's called a word of art in Illinois. It has a very specific legal meaning in the state statute. Let's get a little background. In the medical process started here in 2014. The licenses were let in 2015. There were 21 cultivation slash grow licenses let in 2015, signed in 2015. There were 58, which eventually just became 55 dispensaries. And of those, at the time, those 21 grows were owned by basically 14 companies. Only two of which had very small black participation or any minority participation or any type. The 55 dispensaries were essentially owned by about 37 companies. Since that time, the two companies that had any even kind of recognizable Black participation, essentially bought those partners out, those small partners out. And it was massive consolidation. Going into last year, those 21 groves were essentially owned by 11 companies, 9 of which were multi-state operators. And those 55 dispensaries were essentially owned by 17 companies, including those multi-state operators who scooped up as many as they could, which is 5, with essentially no black ownership or brown ownership. Social equity was then, as part of the many compromises that happened in the legislative process, some of those compromises included giving essentially supply control and monopoly to the existing companies and the growers. In return, there was a social equity component which said that the first, for all intents and purposes, the first 75 dispensary licenses and the first 40 grow infuser licenses and the transport licenses would for the most part go to individuals who met 1 of 3 criteria. Either majority ownership by people with expungible marijuana arrests or convictions, majority ownership by people who lived in what's called disproportionately impacted areas, which has a real, arguably loose meaning and has applied some questionable criteria for defining, or 10 or more employees that live in disproportionately impacted areas or had marijuana. I mean, if you had 10 or more employees, the majority of the employees you live in disproportionately impacted areas and had marijuana restriction. So it's a term of art that was just for the application purposes for the 75 dispensary applications licenses that went up for competition in the fall, and for the current infuser and TAPCO licenses that are up for competition now. It's a legal term of art set by the Illinois legislature.
Disproportionately impacted areas. You mentioned that has somewhat of a loose definition.
Well, no, I wouldn't say loose definition. I would say some disputed criteria. The criteria is really laid out fairly well in the statute. You got to have a number of things. Either a certain level of poverty, a certain level of people on TANF, a certain level of unemployment, and you have to be in an area where there was a high rate of arrest. The problem is the way they measure it. So my own neighborhood is uptown, and I used to live in an area between Montrose and Lawrence, between Broadway and Clark. And when I grew up there 30 years ago, 35 years ago, it was impoverished. It's been gentrified for a long time since then. There's those are $300,000, $400,000 condos in that area, but that area that I just listed is considered disproportionately impacted area because there's a handful of CHA status sites in it, and it doesn't add up.
Gotcha.
So that's one example.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So can you just kind of elaborate on some of the things you've been able to achieve in fighting for causes relative to the legalization? I know that April mentioned that you had helped to make some movement in terms of legislation.
Yeah, well, no, so like with all things, the real movement in terms of legislation comes from movement, comes from people. Most of groups like Chicago Normal, Elevated Education, grassroots groups that have been doing work for 6, 7, 8 years. I play my role as both a lobbyist and somebody who cares in terms of trying to impact the legislation, but it's the people on the ground who impact the legislation. And their greatest accomplishment was that these new licenses, for all intents and purposes, should end up going to folks who were locked out, who've been traditionally locked out of the system, and who were locked out in the last round. I mean, it's pretty ironic and funny, not funny, when you realize we still got, it's 2.5 million people incarcerated in this country. 250,000 of them still on drug-related charges, but every dispensary license owner right now is considered an essential business. So those cats selling 6 years ago were in jail, and the people selling now are essential. It's pretty hard to wrap your head around that.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because I know from seeing about how the lottery system is set up as far as for licensing and people who want to get into the business. I've been hearing that it's been very one-sided. That it's been mostly like corporations, like not to name a few, but like Presto, GTI, those big name, big dogs who are just taking over this and getting that favoritism. And to hear, from your own mouth that, this is being recognized on a big level, I think that it just reassures that we need to do something to level this out and give everybody opportunity for the land of milk and honey, and not just people who are, you know, has two or three yachts. You know what I mean? So,
Definitely. I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge some people who have made comments on the Facebook Live. So, Tori Riley says that this is good information, and he's asking, can I please post this? I am taking notes as well, so I will be dropping some of these in a recap post. I also have some moderators who are in the broadcast who will be dropping links and information when the counselor mentions it or the chef mentions it. So you will be able to get this information to answer your question. I have Jonathan T. Swain in the broadcast. He's the owner of Kim Bark Liquors. He asks, is that the great Brendan Schiller? Indeed, it is the great Brendan Schiller. Thank you for tuning in, Jonathan Swain. I definitely appreciate you.
Everything I know from Mr. Swain.
What was that?
I learned everything I know from Jonathan, so he's my man.
Look, I used to work at Kim Bark Liquors, fresh out of college, and I sure learned a lot. I mean, I had several conversations where I was like, look, I'm not comfortable with having a degree working in here. I need you to talk to me about my future. And he just put me up on game, like, look, this is a pit stop for you. So thank you, Jonathan Swain, for coming in the room. I definitely appreciate you. You are a wealth of knowledge. Thank you. So I wanted to next kind of go into, with you, Timothy, you were already a chef before the conversation evolved and before this was coming into fruition. And so can you kind of discuss your decision to incorporate this into your business? If you got any pushback from anybody, if you thought that because of some of the stigma, it was some hesitation in you getting involved, what was the process like for you as an already existing business owner, adding this component to your business?
so the pushback has been just, I want to say, astoundingly not as much as you would think it would be, because I think the stigma of people from, like, the 1920s, where it was reefer madness, oh my God, you're using the devil's lettuce, you're smoking marijuana, or you're putting food. People get like paranoid, or they've had a bad experience where, one guy told me that he smoked, and by the time he got done smoking, he wanted to run around our campus naked, whatever. So the stigma's actually, I know, yeah, man. So the stigma's actually pushed me more into this industry, because I start getting educated on the oppression behind it, why it really got, it's legalized, why people are were so, like, groundhogs about this. They were like, oh, well, I don't want everybody to know that I smoke, but I want to be secretive knowing that I smoke. And now that with legalization, you have people who were once, house moms, dads on corpus, whatever, and people who are, even preachers and pastors. A lot of preachers and pastors have came to me about, hey, I believe that this is part of God's healing herb. It really just pushed me in the way of, okay, this is not just about us cooking with cannabis, not just about me saying I'm a stoner or whatever. It's actually a movement of healing for people. The stories I've heard of people who have been healed from cancer. People who are usually treated from AIDS. I mean, thousands of ailments that people have. My friend Eddie Gary, one of my business partners, has Crohn's. So he firsthand told me that him taking on the smoking cannabis has really made him, normalize, where he doesn't have to go to the bathroom every 3 seconds. He doesn't have to, have these crazy issues. So it really, for me, makes sense, because if you look at food and how cannabis is, it belongs together. Because if you get great food and a good strain of cannabis, then this is when you have this great experience of healing and bringing people together. I've hosted events where everybody from growers to politicians all in the same room, passing joints. Hey, how you doing? How are you? Police officers come to me saying, hey, thank you for just putting the word out there and educating people on this thing. So I got on it. I've been smoking since I was like 15, so I've been doing it for about 16 years. For the last 4 or 5 years, with legalization goes so strong, I decided to come out as an advocate. I have lost friends because of that. I have family members kind of come at me sideways because of that, but I don't care anymore, because I believe this is something that can help people out. I've had vets come at me saying, hey, you talking to me about this, whatever, and helping me out. One guy in my church, he actually blew off all his fingers during the 4th of July last year. And so he finally got his hands healing but he's tired of being on the prescription pills because it makes him drowsy, it makes him sick. I mean, they counteract whatever. So I said, you know what? I know a couple of doctors who can get you card. Me and him had a deep conversation. I said, man, look, no one's going to judge you for doing this. So let's get you help. And ever since then, I mean, the guy's back to, he bounced back. He's better than ever before. The pain has basically subsided. He's helping out. I've got people who I work with, who I know who grow, who are all for the movement. So it's just been, awesome to see people who are coming out of the shadows, I should say, and saying, you know what, I'm all for it. So.
And I think when you brought up a really good point about the medicinal use and how helpful it is for people who have certain ailments. That's definitely true. I think that as I looked at it initially, it seems as though the prescription drugs that we are allowed to use that are FDA approved to be on the market can sometimes be just as hazardous as some of the other things that people are trying to create certain stigma around. Or more hazardous, I should say.
Of course, and if you look at it, I mean, I've had people come at me many arguments saying, "Oh, this is going to corrupt your mind. This is going to blah 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 this and that." I'm like, well, here's the thing: when you smoke too much cannabis, you just get really hungry and you left everything. You make a little paranoid, but I tell people I know how to help you balance off the bad CBD treatments, whatever, so on. But if you look at some of these drugs that people are on and that lead to other drugs, if I'm taking a prescription drug for a heart attack, that drug, one of the effects of that drug should be death. It should be life. And people are taking type of like big cocktails and just like even my pastor, he just had a stroke. This man was taking 14 different pills a day.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely a lot.
Pills. I said, Pastor, you're gonna kill yourself this way because these pills aren't meant to coincide with one another. And so what I've been doing is I bring down the science of cannabis, meaning terpenes, the entourage effect, the trichomes. So therefore, it's not just I'm saying, okay, I got some bubble kush, I'm gonna put it in here. No, I look at the chemical compounds of what I'm doing and say, how does this play well with the food I'm doing? Let's do great from scratch, wholesome food, not like any processed or anything like that. It's great, just good food. And give people this whole experience, and it's not just throwing them on for a loop-de-loop, or people are getting sick or throwing up or anything like that. So.
Interesting. And so with that, I kind of wanted to move on to some of the restrictions as well, because it's a very difficult process to own a dispensary, and I haven't refreshed myself on the limitations recently, but the last time I checked, I believe there was a stipulation to where people had to have 275K liquid to be able to get the licensing. And I think that one of the restrictions, if I'm not mistaken, is that not only did they have to have those funds liquid, there's not the ability to put the money into an FDIC insured institution. And so that created some limitations as well. I know you may be familiar with some of these limitations, Timothy. I wanted to hear from you as well as the counselor on some of the confinements that kind of navigate how people can get into the industry at different levels. So, for instance, if I want to transport marijuana and I want a chauffeur's license or whatever designation the licensing is that allows me to be able to transport cannabis. If I want to infuse it in foods and provide baked goods to the public. If I want to have a facility somewhat like Timothy described that may not provide the actual substance, but maybe a spot that allows people to use like kind of BYOW type of thing or BYOM type of thing. And I know that's a large question to ask, but I'm kind of wondering, what are some of the barriers that people have had to overcome, or some of the limitations or restrictions in getting licensing that is kind of broken down by what you're trying to do with the marijuana in terms of distribution?
I'm gonna let the counselor go on this first because this is the man who I want to hear from. Actually, on this myself as well. So I'm gonna submit and give them the floor if you need the conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate that because there's actually some misconceptions in there that we can just. So first off, every state is different. Well, first off, let me start with this. There's no certain banking is possible. there's a myth that this is an entirely cash operation. There's something called the Cole Memo that came out in February of 2014, so more than 6 years ago, that allowed for banking of state medical and recreational marijuana businesses as long as the banks met several really high, very difficult regulations, but they could do it. And there's several banks in several states, including at least three banks in this state, who bank marijuana, bank it legally, bank it with federal oversight. So that's one misconception. This has to be completely. It doesn't have to be completely cash game, and hasn't had to be completely cash game since February 2014. Every state has different marijuana licensing regulations, right? There's now 11 recreational states, and there's 28 states that are medical sometimes. So there's 39 states that have some variation of legal, and their schemes are all different. Illinois is in one of those sets of states that has some very restrictive licensing in terms of they limit the number, they create a competitive process. But the competitive process for recreational licensing is not nearly as restrictive as people think. There was almost 4,000 applications, more than 716 unique applicants for the 75 dispensary licenses that were up last month. That opened up, that get announced on May 1 of this year, that opened up on January 1 next year. It was as long as you were a social equity applicant, which almost all were, it was only a $2,500 filing fee. And you didn't have to have any minimum amount in the bank. You did have to show a plan, a financial plan. But like I said, we wrote a bunch of these financial plans. The financial plan could be, we're going to apply for money from the state, because the state required every one of those existing roads, every one of those existing medicinal dispensaries to put in a chunk of money in order to keep their license and to get a rec license. And that chunk of money actually ended up to about $20 million. And they got to keep putting in money. So there's plenty of money for those 35 licenses. Currently, we're in a process that was originally supposed to end March 16th, was extended March 31st, it's been extended to April 30th. I don't think it'll be extended again, to apply for 40 craft grows, 40 infusers, which is what Timothy would apply for, and an unlimited number of transporter licenses. And again, all you have to show is 20 grand in the bank. And again, the filing fees are just $2,500. Now, I don't want to understate it. Having the access, these are competitive, other than the transport license, these are competitive processes. And having the access to the scientific knowledge and language to write these applications, and these applications are 400 to 500 pages long, with a lot of technical writing, that could cost money. The intent of this legislation was that somebody like Timothy gets one of those 40 diffuser licenses that are in the competition right now. The effect may end up being that Coca-Cola bottlers and craft foods and those guys end up getting it. And again, don't get it twisted. Some of those folks are applying; they're applying through fronts, but they're putting in money in ways to get those diffuser licenses. So there is a hurdle. The hurdle is traditional white supremacy and capitalism that's built in throughout this, that creates unequal access to capital and unequal access to resources. But the actual legislation that was written, that was passed last spring, isn't the hurdle anymore in terms of the license.
That definitely clears some things up. And I was taking copious notes here on my little scraps. I asked him before we came in, I said, are you comfortable discussing, access and inequality? And his response was a good one. He said, I'm always comfortable telling the truth. And I appreciate that response. Thank you for that. So, Timothy, is there anything you want to add to that question before we move on to the last couple of questions?
Honestly, like the guy took the words right out of my mouth. This is stuff that we've been seeing. A lot of people, like as far as people who are applying for this, have been seeing the same type of issues where you have these big companies that are a section of this whatever, and they'll like come in under here and so forth and so on, trying to get in on the business because they realize that this is a $1 billion business, and so everybody wants a piece of it. And then when everybody hears that the first year of legalization in Illinois was, I believe, correct, 40 million. Around around $40 million the first month. Their eyes get big. I mean, if they were cartoons, their eyes will become big dollar signs, and everybody starts, hey, we got out of there, we got of this, we got of that. So,
Hmm.
but my fear is this, because I would like people to get the licenses who actually are doing their research, who actually care about the consumer and not just making a quick dollar. Because we have so many people out here who are just throwing labels on this crap product and say, hey, this is cannabis. So
Mm-hmm.
now if somebody who doesn't understand like tolerance, doesn't understand the CB1, CB2, and CB3 receptors that are in the body, the endocannabinoid system, the phytocannabinoid system from the plant itself, and they're going here to somewhere where they don't really care about how the product comes out, but just getting the revenue. Now they get a bad experience with cannabis, and now they're scared to actually get what they need out of cannabis now.
Mm-hmm.
So my prayer in all this is that we get the right people out here who are not just trying to get people stupid high, or not trying to just put out a product, but people who actually care about every single person who's taking a product. If something's going on that they feel like, hey, this is kind of a dope for me. Okay, well, let's try this route. People who are proactive to the whole consumption, and not just react and say, hey, okay, well, now it's leading, let's just throw it out there.
That definitely makes sense. So I'm just going to briefly recap. I see some new people have come into the broadcast. I just want to briefly recap some of the notes that I've taken. So each state has different licensing requirements, as Attorney Schiller actually just stated to us. And then he also mentioned that you need 20 grand in the bank here in Illinois. Filing fee is 2,500. There are unlimited transporter licenses, but the other licenses that are being issued are highly competitive. There's a approximately 400-page application that has a lot of technical terminology in it, and you may have a cost associated with getting some assistance with that application. And so these are some of the moves you can make to benefit from the legalization. I'm just going to check some of the comments to see if we have any additional questions that I need to field in. Nope. Okay, good. So my last couple of questions is kind of creative and non-traditional ways that entrepreneurs can have a portion of their business devoted to cannabis users. And so with specific with specific parameters, I mean, I've talked to people in the beauty industry per se, for say, and I've also talked to people in the real estate industry, and having property that is allowed to be used for the purposes of entertaining people who indulge, is it restricted based on the area? Because is zoning going to come into place? And I'm sure it'll come into place whether or not it's a residential area or a commercial area. But do you think that we'll see a lot of tenant associations advocating for places not to come on their block because they are 420 friendly? Do you think it'll be restricted in terms of where people can put these different facilities? Or do you see it becoming more open and accepting now that it is actually legal, just with regard to specifically real estate and where people are positioning these properties, not just dispensaries, but locations that are more pleasure oriented, weed spas, so to speak. Do you think people will have pushback, or are they becoming more 420 friendly?
You're always going to have people who are old fashioned, put it that way, who believe smoking marijuana kills brain cells that were not productive. Even though I've smoked cannabis throughout my whole career, I've gotten nominations for awards. I've ran multi-million-dollar restaurants. I've done everything you think about as far as the chef do. I've been on TV. I've worked with other people on TV. I'm working on a show with local that I'm doing right now. But I believe people are finding their courage right now to say, you know what, I enjoy cannabis, and not everybody does cannabis. People, no, not everybody does THC. Somebody wants to do CBD and hemp and so forth and so on. And I believe that more people are, if they see the right person saying, you know what, it's okay to do this, I believe that they will be like, you know what, I'm gonna just say it. Hey, I smoke cannabis or I smoke CBD. As for me right now, I actually have it right here right now. This is the packet that I got from the real estate lady, because she actually listed it on a 420 property. So this is her first of doing this, and she's even helping me out in the process, whatever. Like, hey, what can we do to get it together? I'm excited for it. What are you trying to do? Getting the finance put together for what we have planned on the property as well. So there's going to be some hurdles to it. But back to the point, I believe that we're going to see more people for than against.
That makes sense.
Just a strictly legal perspective, let me explain a couple of things. Again, we were talking about what's called social consumption or on-site consumption. When the law initially passed last year, that actually looked like the best opportunity for folks to get in because it just let social consumption, on-site consumption completely open for local municipalities. In the fall, they passed what's called the trailer bill, and they changed that. Now, social consumption, it's still left to municipalities for licensing. There's no state licensing, it's not competitive, there's nothing like that. But local municipalities are only allowed to license social consumption or on-site consumption if the person has a dispensary license, which we already discussed how hard that is, or they have a tobacco license. So, I mean, obviously being creative, if you're going to, but in order to have a tobacco license, a majority of your sales still have to come from tobacco. So it's really hard to figure out. There's creative ways, as always, to maybe work around this, create multiple businesses, figure something out. But as it stands right now, the intent of the law is to really limit social and on-site consumption businesses to dispensaries and those with tobacco licenses, meaning the majority of their incomes coming from the sale of tobacco. And that was really just a head nod to cigar places and things like that. So eventually, I believe that the way people will make money off of this, just like you had a bunch of Southside lounges after Prohibition and the decades after Prohibition, eventually you make money off. It would be easier to make money off social consumption, on-site consumption locations. Those are much easier to put together. You don't have to worry about the competitive licensing process in Springfield. But right now, as a legal matter, it's still an obstacle until that changes. And that was one of the things that the states went through that reversed the kind of social equity that we saw from the first bill.
Right.
Now, one last question for you, Counselor. I'm wondering, because it may not be a number of cases that establish a certain precedent of how things should be handled under the law, do you see there being, and this is, just based on your industry experience and knowledge and a guesstimation, do you think that there'll be a number of cases that will kind of establish how we handle this going forward? Because it may present some issues from a legal aspect that maybe we don't have a blueprint or a guide for.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. See what
So what I'm asking you essentially is, because this is new and there's not a lot of cases that can establish precedents, so that if there was a case brought forth in the court, I couldn't refer to such and so versus so and so because there's nothing to refer to, because this is new in the courts and new in society in terms of legalization. And so I'm wondering, do you think that in terms of what we see, the battles that are taking place in court, because I don't know if you guys have, because you may have your ear closer to the ground, but I haven't heard of any significant cases where there's been a dispute, a legal dispute in question that would kind of give us a roadmap legally where lawyers can refer to a specific case and say, okay, in Vito versus Thompson, this is the decision that was rendered with regard to this specific thing in legalization of marijuana. There's no precedence. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So it depends on what area you're talking about. There's actually could be a lot of precedents, but also depends on what area of law you're talking about, because some of the law this is all statutory. So let's focus on three big areas really quickly, right? The first area is criminal defense, and the question for criminal defense is, if you've ever represented or know somebody who's been arrested in the city of Chicago on a bullshit stop, 95% of the police reports are going to say, I smell an aroma of marijuana, right? Well, now that you have marijuana legalization, they're going to have to come up with some other pretext.
Mm-hmm.
But that has been getting litigated for the last several years, and the question is whether or not there's reasonable suspicion or proper cause for the stop. And there's actually a lot of precedent under that, even when it was just medical marijuana. And it cuts both ways, especially because it was just a medical marijuana scheme. And so there's precedents developing and law developing as relates to criminal defense and those issues. But the other two major areas of litigation that have been occurring over the last several years as it relates to marijuana is the licensing litigation and then discrimination litigation. And so when it comes to licensing, there's been a ton of litigation over whether or not any of these states have violated due process protection. And both of those concepts, both of those Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment constitutional concepts are well ingrained and have a lot of precedents as it relates to all sorts of licensing, liquor licensing, zoning. And so there's been a lot of litigation over that. And then there's also been some very recent litigation out west as it relates to discrimination in the sense of medical issues, if you're on medical marijuana, and in the housing and employment area. That's the area that's really kind of ripe and going to change drastically over the next several years.
The medical portion. Okay. Go ahead, Timothy.
A quick question for Councilman. When you say about the unemployment and housing situation, whatever, can you expound on that a little bit more for me, just as far as like what the hurdles are going to be?
So most of the protections as it relates to employment and housing are federal. But every once in a while, you have a city or county or state put in their own anti-discrimination rules as it relates to various things like employment and housing. And sometimes they include in that protections for people with disabilities and medical conditions. So there's some states out west that both have their own legislation that protects against discrimination for employment housing based on disability or medical conditions, and simultaneously have recreational and medical weed, marijuana. And so applying those state laws, there's been some litigation that hasn't completely fleshed out about preventing discrimination based on a medical need when they're using medical marijuana. I wouldn't rely on that if you're in Illinois, because Illinois state statutes actually the exact opposite of that. Illinois state statute allows your landlord and your employer to discriminate against you based on your use of marijuana, but that's something that's going to be developed over the next few years.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that elaboration. This has definitely been a wealth of knowledge. I feel like I'm a little bit further along in my law school process now because the counselor has put me up on a lot of legal information here. So thank you for that. I definitely appreciate it. What was that?
It's quicker if you just buy the degree online. Law school's a waste of time.
All the lawyers are like, so why are you gonna go back and finish? I'm like, because I started, I just need to finish. And the law is encompassed in everything we do. Everything we do, the law is in it. You have to operate legally. So it's definitely still a relevant thing for us entrepreneurs, knowing how to navigate and get this money legally. That's very important. And so thank you guys for coming on with me, for sharing this information. I will ask that you go in the comments and drop your contact information. If there's any information that you want to share with the audience, please go ahead and drop it in the comments. I know you mentioned Chicago Normal and I believe it was Elevate Education. And so I'm going to go and get the site for those two organizations and drop those in the comments as well. And I'll recap some of the points that you provided me with in the recap post for this broadcast. And so thank each of you for your time. I definitely appreciate it. I don't take it lightly. I hope that you guys stay safe and continue to share information to empower the people in this movement, because there are quite a few myths that I think we dispelled in this conversation. And so thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All right. You all have a good day and stay safe.